All right, so get ready, because today we are going deep into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. And we're not just talking about the story everyone knows, like the classic monster tale.
Right, great.
You, our awesome listeners, sent in some really cool details about a Frankenstein audiobook on Audible.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we're going to see what makes listening to Frankenstein this way so different.
I love it. Even if you think you know Frankenstein backwards and forwards, there's
Yeah.
always a new angle to find, especially when you experience it in a new way, like with this audiobook.
Definitely. It's like going back to a place you think you know, but then
Yeah.
discovering hidden paths and secret spots you never noticed before.
Exactly.
So we've got the original text, which we always like to use as our starting point from Project Gutenberg.
Good old Gutenberg.
Yeah. But then on top of that, we've got the narrator's voice, like how fast or slow they're talking, the sound design, all these elements that can totally change the story.
It's true. It's like they add another layer of interpretation on top of the word.
For sure. And that's what really has us hooked today. How this specific audiobook makes Frankenstein come alive
Right.
in a new way. Like, how does it change how we see the characters and the themes,
Oh, totally. Like the atmosphere of dread and wonder that just oozes from the book.
Totally. So let's start with something super important to Frankenstein, this whole idea of learning and searching for knowledge.
Okay.
Right at the beginning, we meet Robert Walton, this explorer who's obsessed with getting to the North Pole.
He's like, got to get to the top of the world.
Exactly. He's driven by this crazy curiosity, this thirst for discovery, which I think a lot of us can relate to.
For sure, like that urge to go beyond what we know and venture into the unknown.
Right, like pushing the boundaries.
I love that. And it's so cool how Shelley connects Walton's journey with Victor Frankenstein's.
Yeah,
They're both really ambitious, super hungry for knowledge, but their approaches are so different. Walton, even though he's on this crazy expedition, seems more, I don't know, down to earth.
right.
More aware of what he can and can't do, and the dangers involved in his quest.
Yeah.
He even says he wishes he'd learned more languages.
Interesting.
Like he knows that knowledge itself can help you navigate the world and understand all its intricacies.
That's a cool point.
Yeah.
Victor, on the other hand, he starts off inspired by alchemists, like Cornelius Agrippa.
Oh yeah, those medieval guys obsessed with turning lead into gold.
Exactly. And finding the secret to immortality.
The elixir of life, yeah.
But then Victor shifts his focus to natural philosophy.
Like a more scientific approach.
Right. This was a huge shift in thinking back in the 18th century, moving away from the mystical and embracing observation, experimentation,
Yeah, like using reason to understand the world.
Exactly.
And that shift shows how Victor's ambition is growing. He doesn't just want to understand nature anymore. He wants to control it, to manipulate it at its core. He gets fixated on finding the principle of life, the secret that makes things alive.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to go wrong.
Because his quest for knowledge goes way too far, right? Like he crosses ethical boundaries.
Totally. He's so obsessed with his goal that he forgets to think about the consequences, the potential for things to go terribly wrong.
And this is something that still speaks to us today, right? With technology advancing so quickly.
Absolutely. Shelley somehow knew the problems we'd face centuries later.
Yeah.
Ethical questions about AI, genetic engineering, the whole idea of humans playing God.
It's like she saw the future.
Totally. And Frankenstein tackles these issues in a way that feels shockingly relevant today.
Yeah, totally. But let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about another learner in Frankenstein, the creature himself.
Okay.
He's thrown into this world totally alone.
Abandoned by his creator.
Exactly. And he has to figure out everything on his own. From basic survival to language, emotions, how to fit in.
Wow, it's like starting from scratch.
Totally.
Yeah.
And his journey of learning is amazing. In a way, it kind of mirrors our own experiences.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the creature watches the DeLacy family.
Right.
He learns their language and customs, and he reads books like crazy.
Books.
Like Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, The Sorrows of Werther.
Wow, he's got good taste.
Right. These classic works shape his understanding of what it means to be human.
It's like he's building his own education piece by piece.
Exactly. Taking knowledge from all these different sources and creating his own view of the world.
And just like us, the stories he reads influence him. He learns about love, loss, betrayal.
Right, all the messy stuff.
Yeah, all through these powerful narratives.
Which makes you think, how does the narrator of this audiobook bring the creature's voice to life?
Ooh, good question.
Especially if he's dealing with these huge ideas and emotions.
Right, because his ability to speak so eloquently is one of the most surprising things about him.
Totally. Like, he's this monstrous being.
Yeah.
But he can express himself with such depth.
Exactly. It makes us question what it really means to be human.
Definitely. And then there's that crucial moment when he finds Victor's journals
Oh.
and discovers the horrifying truth about his creation, about how Victor was disgusted by him from the very beginning.
That's brutal.
Imagine finding out that the person who made you was repulsed by you right away.
It would shatter you.
It's a rejection that hits him hard.
It fuels his resentment and his desire for revenge.
Absolutely.
And it raises all these questions about identity.
Right.
Like, how do other people's views of us shape who we are?
Especially when it's the people we want to connect with the most.
That's deep. And I bet it's a challenge for the audiobook narrator to capture all those emotions.
Totally. So let's dig into the audiobook experience. What are your first impressions of the narrator, listener? How do they make the creature's voice sound?
Yeah. Like, does it make you feel sympathy, horror?
And what specific things in the narration create that effect? Is it the tone, the pace, how certain words are emphasized?
The way the voice rises and falls.
This is where the magic of audiobooks really shines. It's not just about the words on the page.
It's about how those words are delivered, how the narrator embodies the characters.
Exactly.
And brings the story to life.
And then there's the sound design. Are there any sound effects or music that add to the atmosphere?
Right. Like, do they create moments of dread, wonder, or even like a creepy intimacy?
Yeah, those elements can really pull us into the story, make us feel like we're right there with Victor and the creature.
Totally. Like, we're part of their messed up journey.
Okay, let's pause here for a second and gather our thoughts. We've talked about a lot, from the character's thirst for knowledge to the creature's journey of self-discovery.
And how this particular audiobook might be changing how we experience the story.
Exactly.
And we are back, diving even deeper into Frankenstein. It's amazing how this story just keeps giving. We're digging into the themes, seeing how this specific Audible audiobook adds like a whole other dimension.
It's true. And speaking of dimensions, one thing that blows me away about Frankenstein is how it works on so many levels. It's a thrilling adventure, a classic horror story, and at its core, this deep dive into what it means to be human. You know?
Totally. The consequences of our choices, the desperate need for connection.
Exactly.
And those themes are woven together so brilliantly, especially those ethical dilemmas that drive the story.
Oh, for sure. Like Victor Frankenstein's ambition, his drive for knowledge without thinking about the consequences. That's a lesson we can all relate to, even today.
Big time, especially now, with science moving so fast.
Like Mary Shelley had a time machine or something.
Yeah.
She saw these challenges coming centuries ago.
Right.
The ethical stuff around AI, genetic engineering, humans playing God.
It's all there in Frankenstein, and it feels like super relevant today.
For sure. It's not just about the science itself. It's about the human side.
The responsibility that comes with power.
Yeah. And Victor's big mistake is that he doesn't see that responsibility. He's so focused on discovering new things, pushing boundaries, that he completely ignores the potential for harm.
Like he can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the saddest parts of the story. Victor abandoning the creature.
Heartbreaking.
It's a total act of cowardice, driven by fear and disgust. And it has terrible consequences for both of them.
You have to think about the impact of that rejection on the creature. He's born pure, wants love and acceptance, but the person who made him is horrified by him.
Talk about a traumatic start to life.
It's like being told you're unwanted the second you're born, that you're a monster.
We would mess anyone up.
Especially someone struggling with who they are, where they belong.
Totally. And that's where the story connects with us, you know, even if we've never faced anything that extreme.
Right.
We've all felt rejected, left out, misunderstood.
Frankenstein taps into that universal feeling of isolation and longing.
Yeah.
It reminds us how much we need empathy and connection.
For sure. It makes you wonder how the audiobook narrator portrays that isolation, like that deep desire to connect.
Oh, I know. Does the creature's voice show that bitterness? The resentment growing as he's pushed away again and again?
It's a great question. Because even though he looks monstrous, he's incredibly articulate.
Yeah, he expresses his pain, his longing, his rage so powerfully.
He challenges what we think it means to be human.
What do you hear in the creature's voice as the story goes on, listener? Can you sense that shift as his hopes are crushed, as his isolation deepens?
And what about Victor? How does the narrator show his spiral into guilt and despair?
Is it in the tone, the pacing? Maybe they use sound effects to highlight his inner turmoil.
Those details can make such a difference in how we experience the story.
A well-placed sound, a change in the narrator's voice, it can send shivers down your spine or make you really feel for a character.
Right. It's like the audiobook builds this soundscape that immerses us in the world of the story.
It adds another layer of meaning and emotion to the words,
It's a collaboration between the author, the narrator, and the sound designer.
working together to bring it all to life.
And what's really fascinating is how Shelley connects Victor and the creature's journeys.
They both want connection, but they end up alone.
Victor, because of his guilt and fear.
And the creature because of how he looks and how society rejects him.
Two sides of the same tragic coin.
Makes you think. What does this tell us about our own need for empathy and understanding? How often do we miss the humanity in people who are different?
Like, how often do our fears and prejudices stop us from showing compassion and acceptance?
We can all be a little bit Victor sometimes, turning away from those who need us because they make us uncomfortable.
Or because they don't fit into our neat little boxes of what's normal.
We all want to be seen, to be understood.
But fear can get in the way.
It distorts how we see things,
Leads us to do things we regret. Just like Victor abandoning the creature.
which sets off the chain of events that destroys everything he loves.
It's a stark reminder of the power of empathy, of bridging the gaps between us.
Seeing the shared humanity that connects us all,
Frankenstein is a call for compassion,
for understanding.
for recognizing that even when faced with differences, with fear, with the unknown,
It's our empathy that truly makes us human.
let's take a moment to process all that. We've covered a lot. The complexity of Victor and the creature's bond, the impact of rejection, the need for empathy that runs through the whole book.
And in the last part of our deep dive, we'll explore the tragic ending of Frankenstein, the final showdown, the lingering questions it leaves us with. We'll also see how the audiobook portrays those final moments and brings this timeless story to a close.
We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Frankenstein. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. We've walked alongside Victor and his creation, felt their pain, their anger.
Explored those ethical dilemmas that make you really think.
And now we're at the tragic ending, the consequences of it all.
It's a moment of truth, isn't it?
For Victor and the creature, but also for us as readers and listeners.
They have to face what Victor's actions led to, how destructive unchecked ambition can be.
And that need for empathy, for understanding, that just runs through the whole story.
Speaking of understanding, I'm really curious to hear how the audiobook narrator handles this final scene. The confrontation between Victor and the creature. It's so intense.
So much emotion packed in there.
Anger, grief, desperation, this twisted longing for connection.
It must be tough for the narrator to capture all that.
I know. They have to show the weight of the creature's sorrow, his rage as he mourns Victor.
The one person who could have accepted him.
And at the same time, the narrator has to convey Victor's inner turmoil.
His guilt, his regret.
And maybe even a sliver of hope that his warnings might save Walton from the same fate.
It's like a classic tragedy, you know.
Where the characters are trapped by their own choices, driven by their passions, and ultimately destroyed by them.
I bet the sound design is crucial here.
Well, for sure.
Amplifying those emotions in the final scenes.
Totally. Sound effects, music, even those moments of silence.
They create this atmosphere of dread.
Yeah, like doom is coming, you know?
It pulls you in even deeper.
It's like the sound design becomes another way of telling the story, hitting us on a gut level.
Adding something extra to the words themselves.
What about you, listener? Were there any specific sounds in this part of the audiobook that really stood out?
Any sound effects or music that gave you chills or made you feel a certain way?
Because sometimes it's those little things that stick with you long after the story's over.
They shape how you see the events and the characters.
One thing that always hits me about the ending of Frankenstein is how open-ended it is.
Oh, how so?
Even in death, Victor and the creature are connected. Their fates are tied together.
Right.
And the creature's last words, his remorse, his decision to end his own life, they leave us with a mix of sadness and a glimmer of hope.
It's like he's found some peace, some understanding of the harm he's caused.
It makes you think about redemption, whether it's possible even after doing terrible things.
It's a question that stays with you long after you finish the book.
It's something we all have to grapple with as we think about our own choices and the capacity for both good and evil that's inside each of us.
Frankenstein doesn't give us easy answers.
It makes us confront the messy reality of what it means to be human.
The consequences of our actions.
And the power of our choices to shape not just our own lives, but the lives of others. That's why it's such a powerful story. It challenges us, makes us think, and sparks these conversations about the core of humanity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what stayed with you the most, listener? Did hearing Frankenstein as an audiobook change how you saw the story?
Does it challenge your views or just give you a new way to connect with this amazing book? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, happy listening.